What's up, America's history fans? 8th edition here. You want another review video? I got chapter 4 for you right now. Let's get going on the growth, diversity, and conflict between 1720 and 1763. We are getting oh so closer to the American Revolution. All right, we're going to jump up to New England and talk about their freehold society. So when we're talking about farm families, we're going to focus on women in the household economy. Women in New England and really all the colonies were subordinate to men, and they were expected to be silent around company and guests, and they often did work around the house. And they often had 6 to 7 children by their 40s, New England women. So they were expected to give birth to a lot of children and to raise a lot of children as well. When we're talking about inheritance, many New England immigrants sought to own land, and children of wealthy families received land when they were married. Oh, by the way, going back to women, when they got married, any property that they had, they lost and it became property of their husband. So once married, the wife lost all property rights to her husband. Didn't matter how rich or how poor she was. Once she was married, it belonged to her husband. As population grew, less land was available for children. This is going to lead some people to want to expand out west more. And farmers adopted and grew maize. We spent a lot of time talking about maize in chapter 1, this idea of corn and how valuable and good it was for production in terms of feeding both people and animals as well. And eventually, New England is going to focus on raising livestock, and a pretty good industry will emerge of selling livestock. All right, jumping over to the middle colonies in New York, tenant farmers had a hard time gaining land and wealth. And a tenant farmer is somebody who is renting land. In Pennsylvania, remember, that's a Quaker colony. There's going to be some conflict there. William Penn encouraged Quakers and Protestants to move to Pennsylvania. And he really focused on Germans, and he basically would take out advertisements in Europe saying, hey, come to my land, Germans and other Europeans. We have this great thing going on in Pennsylvania, so come on over. Many immigrants in Pennsylvania became squatters, and squatters were people who just settled on land and said, you know what, this is my land now, or they're going to try to make it their land. It didn't matter who it actually belonged to. Squatters today, you see them sometimes in big cities with abandoned buildings. People just go in there and live in these abandoned buildings. That is a squatter. And eventually, the Penn family is going to claim Indian land near Philadelphia. And this is interesting because William Penn favored or advocated paying Native Americans for their land. So his family is going to essentially just take some land from Native Americans. That's going to lead to some conflict and distrust. And many people in Pennsylvania earned a living as farmers and storekeepers, especially those Germans. They really were farmers. Cultural diversity, by far, Pennsylvania was the most ethnically diverse colony, and many immigrants married within their own ethnic groups as well. Germans left Germany due to conscription, which is a fancy word for the military draft. They wanted religious freedom and they wanted to escape high taxes as well. And as I mentioned before, many of them became farmers. Scots-Irish were a group of people, and here is a very famous Scots-Irish individual. Do you know who that guy is? We've not talked about him yet, but he's very important in U.S. history. If you said Andrew Jackson, you are absolutely correct. Now, the reason the Scots-Irish came to America was the Irish Test Act of 1704. And this law said that only members of the Church of England could vote in Ireland. Well, it's interesting because Ireland has a large Catholic population. So many of them were denied the right to vote. So many migrated to Philadelphia as they were lured by religious freedom, again by William Penn in Pennsylvania. All right, here what we're looking at is the symbol of the Quakers. And by the 1740s, Quakers were becoming a minority in Pennsylvania. Are you ready for this? Watch this. It's shrinking, like they're a minority. It took me like 5 minutes to figure that out. I really hope you're impressed. The Scots-Irish were hostile towards Indians, and we will look at an example of that in just a little bit. All right, 2 major cultural movements impacted colonial America. One event, the Enlightenment, the other one, Pietism. All right, so we have a transportation and a print revolution going on, or drastic changes in these two industries. So roads are developing slowly in colonial America because they are very costly and they're difficult to build. So what we see is as transportation increases, as more roads are being developed, and certainly waterways are being used more for transportation, information is going to go with that transportation. In other words, we're going to see news go along the same routes that people are traveling. Colonial newspapers developed with news from Europe. And in the late 17th, early 18th centuries, we have the Enlightenment. I do have a video on the Enlightenment as well. Check that in the description. It is specifically mentioned in the new curriculum. So the European Enlightenment stressed human reasoning and natural rights. And in that, you're going to hear a lot throughout the beginning of this course, idea of natural rights. That's John Locke here. And he wrote about natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and the consent of the governed, or the permission of the people to rule. So the people are giving permission to the government to rule. Now, Ben Franklin, the American Ben Franklin, had many contributions to the Enlightenment. He was a founder of the Pennsylvania Gazette. Now, here's an early edition of this newspaper. I'll zoom in for you so you can read it if you want. Good luck reading that. Franklin was a deist, as was Thomas Jefferson and a few others. And what deism is this belief in God, but also the belief that God did not interfere in the world either positively or negatively. So in other words, God created the world and the universe and kind of stepped back and let people make their own decisions, and he did not get involved. American pietism and the Great Awakening was a religious revival heavily based on emotion. So in New England in particular, we're going to see the Great Awakening here. And Jonathan Edwards, this guy here, who had something like 54 grandchildren, one of them goes on to become the Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, and, oh, by the way, shoots and kills Alexander Hamilton in a duel. More on that later. He was this preacher, and he was known for his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And you'll see his quotes, I'm sure. He's talking about God being really pissed off, and you're going to burn in hell forever, and hell is hotter than you can ever imagine, and eternity is longer than you can ever imagine. He did a really good job of giving these descriptive images of hell and made a lot of people get baptized, especially their children as well. He drew inspiration from religious movements in Europe, as did this guy from Europe, George Whitefield. Now, he was a great orator, and he would travel around the country and give these amazing speeches that even Ben Franklin was in awe over. He traveled throughout the colonies, and he and Jonathan Edwards and many others became known as New Lights. And these are these new preachers who focus on emotionalism. So these New Lights, again, are those that embraced the Great Awakening and converted. And the Old Lights are these older preachers that were against conversions and the emotionalism of the Great Awakening. So we kind of see, a little dispute here, a little throwdown between the Old Lights and the New Lights. Old Lights think of old school, New Lights think of new school. So the New Lights had these new ideas, this real focus on emotionalism, and the Old Lights did not really agree with that. So what's the significance of this? Well, the New Lights here, the First Great Awakening, is going to undermine traditional authority. We're going to see many new churches develop, many New Light churches. Also, we're going to see New Light colleges. Colleges like Princeton, Columbia, Rutgers, all of these were created as New Light institutions. And again, this challenge to authority would later influence the American Revolution. It really set the stage for challenging authority. And only a couple decades later, we're going to have the American Revolution. So let's talk about social and religious conflict in the South. Many African Americans and poor whites were left out by Anglican or the Church of England ministers. So then we have a revival going on down there as well, and this is the Presbyterian revival. And many converted in Virginia and other areas of the South. The diversity in religion that developed because of these new branches of Christianity, these new churches, challenged the tax-supported Anglican Church. So the Baptist insurgency focused on adult baptism or being born again. So it's a choice for an adult to be baptized. And baptism appealed to African Americans because there was this belief that all people were equal. So they were included as well. And the House of Burgesses feels threatened by this in Virginia, so it made it illegal to preach to slaves without their owner's permission. So if I were to go to a plantation and start preaching about baptism and religion, and I didn't have the permission of the slave owner, I would get in trouble. I would be breaking the law. And here's what the interior of the Virginia House of Burgesses looked like. If you go to Williamsburg, Virginia, you can actually see it there. It's pretty cool. All right, we're going to go to 1750 to 1763. We're going to focus on the French and Indian War, and this was a conflict in the Ohio Valley. The French were building forts in the Ohio Valley in present-day western Pennsylvania and present-day Ohio. And George Washington, our first president, essentially started the war in Pennsylvania. And there is a young George. He goes out there, gets into a little skirmish with the French. He ends up being defeated and comes home. Little do you know, he just starts what's essentially a world war. So in 1754, we have the Albany Congress, and the purpose of this was to keep the Iroquois Native Americans on the side of the British. Now, at this Congress, Benjamin Franklin proposed the Albany Plan of Union in this first political cartoon in United States history. And this is a snake, and it says join or die. And you'll notice you have New England colonies over here, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. So it's this idea that all of these colonies have to come together or they will die. This is his proposal. Now, it passed at the conference, but it was rejected by colonial legislatures and the British. And the reason it was rejected by the legislatures was that they didn't want to pay taxes and they felt that they would lose some of their own identity. And the British didn't like it because they thought it gave too much independence to the colonists. So the war hawks end up winning. Anytime the words war hawks, that refers to people that favor war. We're going to see this again in the War of 1812 and even Vietnam. Britain declared war on France, and it became a world war. Colonists could only be promoted so far based solely on being colonists. In other words, George Washington could advance so far in rank only because he was an American. It didn't matter how qualified he was. That's going to lead to resentment from the colonists towards the British. So the Great War for Empire, after 9 years of fighting, so from 1754 to 1763, Britain wins the French and Indian, also known as the 7 Years' War. You may be asking yourself, if they fought for 9 years, why is it called the 7 Years' War? Well, the first 2 years there really wasn't much fighting, and war is really formally declared in 1756. Now, France is essentially removed from North America. They're pretty much gone, and Britain gains all that land. Now, keep in mind that the Native Americans had a pretty good relationship with the French, and they really did a lot of trading. So now the Indians lost a valuable trading partner. All this area in pink here, Ohio, present-day Ohio, Kentucky, all this Ohio River Valley and Canada belonged to the French. Now, in 1763, it belongs to the British. Now, right after the war, we have a Native American rebellion called Pontiac's Rebellion. This was an Indian rebellion against colonists encroaching or coming onto Native American land. And this led to the British issuing the Proclamation Line of 1763. So let me bring this map back up. Pontiac's Rebellion happened in like Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, this area here, and even a little further over here. So the British, in order to avoid conflicts with Native Americans, issued the Proclamation Line, which is this border between the dark pink and the light pink, which happens to be the Appalachian Mountains. And Britain says to the colonists, you cannot go past the Appalachian Mountains. And the colonists are like, why not? We just fought and won all this land. Why the heck are you not letting us go over here? There's lots of land, especially like poor farmers want to go out there. And the British said, no, you cannot go west. And the colonists get really upset about it because they just fought for this land. That leads to conflict as well. Britain is going to go through rapid industrial growth and experience a consumer revolution. And this would lead to increased debt for the colonists. So more and more colonial farmers are going to seek land near the Appalachian Mountains. Again, this would be an issue in 1763 with the Proclamation Line of 1763. So we have some further issues between colonists and Native Americans and something called the March of the Paxton Boys. These were Scots-Irish in Pennsylvania, and they massacred 20 Native Americans. In South Carolina, we have the Regulator Movement, which were a group of people that demanded more fair treatment of colonists living in the western portion of South Carolina, and they also wanted better taxes and more representation. So this really exemplifies conflict between the East and the West in a certain colony, in the rich and the poor. There's quite a few of these examples of conflict between East and West and rich and poor. All right, we'll do a quick recap for this chapter. First, know that the middle colonies, especially Pennsylvania, were ethnically and religiously diverse. The Enlightenment ideas changed society, encouraged individuals to question authority, which would play a large role in the American Revolution. The First Great Awakening created religious diversity and questioned traditional authority as well. So both the First Great Awakening and the Enlightenment was all about questioning authority. And the French and Indian, also known as the 7 Years' War, removed France from North America and ended something known as salutary neglect. And Britain begins to take a more hands-on approach to this. If you want more info on this, I have a great video on why the year 1763 is so important. And the Paxton Boys and regulators demonstrated tensions between the East and West in their respective colonies. All right, guys, there's chapter 4 for you. If you have not already, please take a moment and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. And if you found this video helpful, please share it with as many people as possible, whether they're people in your class, your teachers, your neighbor, your grandma, I don't know, anybody who would like this video. I thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.